Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the 10th edition reveal, what it means for this channel, and for my website going forward. I'll cover all of the content that was substantive about the new edition on the Warhammer community page, as well as substantive content from elsewhere. I hope that you will all consider clicking like and subscribing if you haven't subscribed, and leaving a comment. But as to the comments, I'm not interested in debating the veracity of the tidbits that I mentioned that are not on the Warhammer community page. I would not be saying them if I were not quite confident that they're accurate. Of course, it's certainly possible that a couple of these things are not, but I really think they are. I would not be sharing them. For those of you who have better things to do than hover over the Warhammer community page during Adepticon waiting for updates, I guess it's at least trivially possible that you missed the big news. 10th edition 40k will be dropping this summer, and that was like not exactly secret, so that's not a revelation. But we did get our first look at a data sheet and some very basic information directly from GW that confirms a number of rumors that were already out there while discrediting other rumors. And there is also other information that I think is easily trackable back to Games Workshop that's appeared elsewhere on the internet today, that tells us some other things too that weren't necessarily in that Warhammer community page. So let's talk about what we know. First thing, 10th edition will feature significantly slimmed down rules. Allegedly, players will only need the data sheets for their units, which will be immediately free online for all factions as soon as the edition drops, and then also sold as a physical product. And these will be like the ones for Age of Sigmar, like unit cards that are significantly bigger than data cards that have all of the information for your unit. So you print or buy your unit cards, and then you just bring the ones for the units that you're actually running in your army to the game, and all your stats are in front of you, and all of the rules for those units. So just to be clear, if you're running Guardians, literally everything Guardians can do will be on the data card. There'll never be some ability that you need to look up in your codex or some FAQ that you have to refer to. Everything will be there. We're told that actual army rules will always fit on 1 to 2 pages. So everything you need to know about your units that's not on the data cards, including your stratagems, 1 to 2 pages. And anytime they do an update, something like an FAQ, you're not going to have to go to some other book or website or publication. They will simply republish the rules, either the data card online or the rules for the faction or whatever it is. So you could just, at any given time, you will have access to all of your rules in the data cards, and then like one other place, your codex or online. And that is, I don't care who you are, that's good for everybody. That's great. It's going to make it way easier to get into the game, and just much easier for players at the table. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, in addition to all of the units rules appearing on the datasheet, the data sheets have changed significantly. So in 9th edition, there were 9 different characteristics in a model's stat block, and now there are only 6. The characteristics for attacks, number of attacks, strength, ballistic skill, and weapon skill are gone. They're still on the datasheet, but they're no longer part of the stat block for the model. They're now in the stat block for the weapons themselves, which is going to save players time and lower the barrier to entry. So it's possible that you will have a unit armed with 2 different melee weapons with different numbers of attacks, in the same way that in 9th edition you potentially could have 2 shooting weapons that had different numbers of attacks, right? So your number of attacks will be determined by the melee weapon. This doesn't, or different strength or whatever, just as it was before. But now, instead of having to work out that like your Banshee is strength 3 and the sword is +1, but it gets +1 to move on it's just, the sword, it'll just say strength 4 on the sword, which is good. As far as the thing with it, some people were getting salty about different weapons having different numbers of attacks, and that's the way things work now, right? Because like mirror swords for example, a Banshee with Piercing Strike, a Banshee Exarch with Piercing Strike puts out 10 attacks, but now it'll say Mirror Swords have 10 attacks, or however many they have in 10th edition, instead of you having to work out that a Banshee Exarch has 4 attacks, but it goes to 5 attacks if you give it an upgrade, and then the Mirror Swords double the attacks, but the doubling is applied after the stat is like, that's complicated, especially for a new player, and that's gone. Those kinds of calculations are gone. They're built into the weapons themselves. I think that's a good thing. Some of you, however, who find it very easy to do basic math and therefore are don't really care about this change, you may also have noticed that I said earlier that 4 stats have moved from the model's stat block to the weapon stat blocks, but there are still 6 stats for the models, and the math doesn't work there. And this is because a new stat has been added called OC, which stands for Objective Control. Now, the assumption here is that the current Objective Secured rule is gone, and instead, the way the game is going to reflect some units being better at controlling objectives than others is every unit will have an OC value, which will determine how powerful it is on the objective. I think the way it's going to work, I think it's a safe bet, every model in the unit that's on the objective will count for whatever the number in the OC square is. So I think we can guess that most infantry will have a 1, but then anything that is currently would count as troops, the stuff that had objective secured. There are no more troops. Troops are now called battle line. I think that's the same as in Sigmar. Those are going to have 2s probably, and then maybe other models will have different numbers. There are already factions now that have special rules where like models count for 2 or 3 for the purposes of objective control, or knights can count for 10 or whatever. So those rules will just be built into the stat block. There won't be a thing you have to read. You'll just look at the OC value. I think this is a cool way to create nuance around OBSEC, or around objective control without the OBSEC mechanic, which actually was a little bit complicated. It was hard for new players to work out, well, if I have 2 models with OBSEC, but they have 1 model with OBSEC, but 3 other models, but I have 2. It was complex, at least for people learning the game, and I think this is much simpler and will result in some interesting nuance, although you will no longer be able to throw Will of Azurian on a Warlock Skyrunner and zip it onto an opponent's objective with Quicken and just strip it, right? Because 1 model with extra OC is not going to trump 12 models probably in your opponent's backfield sitting on an out of line of sight objective. So some of the tricks are going to be different. It's not clear. Here's another change. I mentioned that troops are going to become battle line. It's not entirely clear what the current category or the new categories will be. Maybe the current categories, fast attack, elites, heavy, support, and whatever, maybe they will be exactly the same. It's possible. But what we do know is that force organization charts are gone. Models will still have designations. There may still be detachments, but your models no longer have to fit into detachments in a meaningful way. Instead, when you create an army list, you must have an HQ, and then you may not have more than 3 units in any individual category of type of unit, except for battle line, where you are allowed up to 6. So the rule of 3 is gone because we don't need it anymore, because it now will not be possible for you to have 6 fast attack units, right? Because now fast attack units will cap out at 3 no matter what. Anyway, now for those of you who are really losing your, I don't know, I can't think of a good Eldar metaphor, losing your aperitifs at the Eldar poetry reading where we're finding out about 10th edition. For those Sam Han players out there who are horrified by the notion of being limited to 3 fast attack slots, I really don't think you need to worry, because I strongly suspect that there will be sub-faction exceptions, just as there are in Age of Sigmar. A lot of these rules that we're seeing in 10th Ed have some sort of corollary or have been ported over directly from Age of Sigmar. And Sigmar has this rule where thematic sub-factions, like Tempest's Eye and Cities of Sigmar, the Pony faction, that's what I don't play a lot of Sigmar, but when I do, I'm a Tempest's Eye guy. All of your ponies, your pony riders with their pistols, count as battle line. And I think it's very likely that, say, in a Sam Han list, all of the Wind Riders are going to count as battle line. It's a pretty typical Sigmar mechanic, and so I think that we're going to see that in 40k too. I think that this sort of general notion of army construction being simpler but still limited will lead to lists that are more balanced in terms of the types of units that we see on the table, and it's also just going to be way easier, especially for new players, to build an army that is legal. I don't think we're really going to be losing a lot by no longer having to make sure that we fit into various types of detachments. I think that the payoff of that was not equal to the burden created by the complexity, especially for newer players. Incidentally, one of the things that is not coming over from Sigmar, and I am relieved about, there was a rumor about this online, people were saying that toughness was going away. And because in Sigmar, weapons just automatically wound on a certain roll. There is no toughness. That has not happened. There's still toughness in 40k, so you can all, calm down. I was really worried about that. I would not have been happy with that change. Another change that is allegedly coming, which was not on the Warhammer community page, but for which there is excellent evidence. A lot of data sheets apparently feature rules that activate on an opponent's turn, but involve you having to make some kind of a choice. So this will also allegedly be true of stratagems. So instead of, while your opponent is taking their turn, unless you're using this one clever stratagem, really all you're ever doing is rolling armor saves. Now you're going to have decisions to make, because a lot of your units are going to have abilities that potentially could trigger, and that means that you have to stay engaged and be thoughtful, and you're not like waiting for your turn to make interesting choices. Ideally, that's going to be an improvement to gameplay. I am optimistic that it will. Stratagems are allegedly more powerful, but there are way fewer of them. So there are going to be a handful of generic stratagems. I'm hearing 6. And then every faction or sub-faction will have about 6. And so each player is going to have access to 12, but you will have very few command points. In Age of Sigmar, command points don't last from battle round to battle round. You get like 2 or 3, depending. It might even be 1 or 2, and then there's a way to get a third one. You have like 1 to 3 points per battle round to spend on stratagems, and then they don't carry over. It's very likely that that's how things are going to work, but allegedly the stratagems are bigger game changers, and they are in Sigmar. The strats in Sigmar are really very powerful. So we'll probably see something like that. The faction-specific stratagems ideally and allegedly are going to preserve all of the flavor, stuff like battle focus. I have no idea what they're going to be for Eldar, but that like ducking out of line of sight, Eldar trickery, I think a lot of that. Some of it will be abilities on data sheets, but I'm sure we'll have some of that preserved in the stratagems too. But I think the generic stratagems are also going to be quite powerful. That's the word. And frankly, they are in current 40k, right? Like some extreme bravery, insane bravery is one that many of us use in just about every game. Occasionally using a command reroll. Like they're pretty good. I suspect all of the ones that currently exist will carry over in some form or another. Although insane bravery would have to be different because morale has changed. I'll get to that later. HQ models. The word is that many more HQ models will have some kind of aura ability, but the same aura ability will not be able to be in effect in multiple places on the table. So there isn't going to be a rule against you having 2 autarchs or 3 autarchs, whereas in 9th edition they tried to limit the number of autarchs we could take, which seemed kind of silly to me because autarchs were struggling to find their way into lists. But that was the thing back in the codex. You couldn't have more than 1 per detachment. Now you're going to be able to take any number you want, but whatever abilities or abilities autarchs have, you'll only be able to activate them, an individual ability for 1 autarch anywhere on the table, and so that they're going to disincentivize HQ spamming by adding that limitation. Core is gone as a keyword. The core mechanic is finished. I am pleased with this. I don't think it was bringing enough to the game to be worth having to keep track of. So that's a thing. I think that we can make the inference that relics and warlord traits like stratagems will be significantly slimmed down. Because if you think about it, if all of our rules, including our stratagems, have to fit on 2 codex pages, it's hard to imagine that factions will have access to more than, say, 3 relics and 3 warlord traits. I actually think it could be less than that. It could be 1 of each, and then I'm sure that there will be generic options for relics and warlord traits, or I suspect there will anyway, in the core rules. But I don't think I definitely don't think we're going to have 6 of each to choose from, plus 1 of each for our subfactions. I don't think that's going to be a thing. Another inference we can make from the small amount of data floating around about actual data sheets is that, much like in the beginning of 8th edition, I think most weapons are probably going to be less killy. So the Termagant datasheet that dropped on the Warhammer community page with the 10th ed reveal shows shooting profiles that, if you also think about the existing stratagems for Tyranids, there's one that like makes flesh borers better, and there's some optional like subfaction stuff. They have about half the damage output that they would in any list that would actually take Termagants, and so that's a big come down for the creepy little clackers compared to 9th ed. So I think we're going to be rolling fewer dice overall, and I also think there's a word out there that other units are going to be even more durable. So there's, I think, some pretty credible evidence that some vehicles may have toughness of even in excess of 11. So it could be that something like a Bright Lance or a Las Cannon, certain targets, it's still only going to wound those targets on like a 5-up, which is okay. I mean, it kind of makes sense against a heavily armored target that maybe you would only have a 1 in 3 chance of cracking the armor. And I think that what we're looking at with weapons that are less killy and then tough units that are more durable is that what we were seeing in 9th edition 40k, where it was very chess-like, there was a ton of trading, and if you got caught flat-footed, you really could lose half your list or more in a single turn. There are crazy stories from the Art of War guys about picking up, doing 115 wounds on turn 1 to an opponent who hasn't even gone yet. I don't think that's going to happen anymore. And I think even our fragile space elves are going to have more staying power, and a lot of your opponent's tougher units, you're going to have to think about destroying them not in a single turn, but over multiple turns. And so as the game goes through the 5 turns, there's a pretty safe bet that people are not going to be getting tabled on turn 2 or turn 3 like we were seeing in 9th ed. I think it'll still be highly tactical, but the tactics around scoring are going to be tactics around scoring that don't involve just tabling your opponent. You'll kill their models, but I think tabling in the earlier mid part of the game probably will be a thing of the past. And that could be a real feel bad experience for newer players playing against more competitive players. And so I think it could be a positive change. Another change, the morale phase is totally gone. Instead, units that have lost models take these battle shock tests during the command phase at the beginning of the turn, and failing those tests won't cause models to be destroyed, but will instead impose penalties that will make the affected units less effective. So losing models to leadership all the way back to like 2nd ed 40k has been kind of a feel bad thing. And so that's gone, but it does make sense, if the unit is really shaken up, if they've been through something terrible, if they've taken a bunch of casualties. I don't know what it's going to be, but maybe they'll have reduced OC value or worse ballistic skill or -1 to wound. I don't know, but there's going to be some sort of penalty or penalties that apply instead, and I think that's cool. I think that could lead to some interesting tactical considerations, and it also, apparently there are going to be fewer ways to just avoid battle shock than there were to avoid morale. In addition to insane bravery, a lot of factions had ways to mitigate or avoid ever really suffering the consequences of failed morale, and apparently that's not going to be a thing anymore. Another change that's not a change to core rules. GW has announced that in addition to the 10th edition game, they're going to be releasing even simpler rules for combat patrol play. Combat patrol play is 500 point play, but apparently these combat patrol games are going to be written specifically for the units in the combat patrol boxes. So players who are new to 40k will be able to buy one of those combat patrol boxes and have a playable 500 point force for an introductory version of 40k that they can play against anybody else who bought one of those combat patrol boxes. And I think that's really cool for two reasons. One, hugely lowers the barrier to entry, like massively, but also if some of the additional simplicity is being applied to those introductory combat patrol games, I think that insulates regular 40k from potentially being oversimplified. The battle cry for this new edition is simple or not simple. The rules writers allegedly have been trying to find ways to make the game as tactically nuanced as it is in 9th edition, which I frankly think is the high watermark for tactical nuance ever in all of 40k, but to make it less needlessly complex. And I am feeling optimistic that they may have largely succeeded at this. No matter what, all of us are going to be able to find at least one thing about, and probably more things than one, that we miss about 9th edition and one thing that we don't like about 10th. But I really think that overall, it's very likely, we won't know for sure until we see, but it's very likely that this is going to be a really excellent edition of the game that achieves a lot of what it sets out to do, which is to preserve tactical complexity without having needless rules bloat. And it is the same team of rules writers who wrote the 9th edition rules, which I was so fond of, but nevertheless, I have to admit, having them spread out in 5 different places and often written in these highly legalistic ways that made it difficult to interpret intent, that was frustrating. And I think that a lot of that will have been solved in 10th ed. Here's another change. So psychic powers, there will no longer be psychic powers in your army rules. Instead, there's no psychic phase. Instead, psychic powers will all be on the data sheets for the units that have the abilities, and they will happen. You'll still roll to cast. I don't know if it'll be 2d6 or 1d6 or what the mechanics will be, but you'll still roll to cast, and they will happen in a phase that is appropriate for the power. So like Smite, for example, is going to be a ranged attack. You'll do it in the shooting phase. It probably still just does mortal wounds, but it's happening when shooting attacks are happening. And that is more straightforward. I hope that like Warlocks remain as customizable. I think it would be cool if a bunch of those powers still appeared on the datasheet and you decided which ones you were using, but you're not going to be picking them out of the core book, and that might mean that some of them are pared down a little bit, but there are at least a couple of Warlock powers that currently are seeing little to no play, so I don't think that's terrible. So those are the big changes that we know about so far. And I have to admit, I was really, until the reveal, I was very nervous about 10th edition. I was trying to be optimistic in my videos, but rumors about simpler rules and fewer stratagems had me concerned that in an effort to get new players into the game, GW might end up eliminating a lot of the interesting choices and tactical nuance that makes 40k the game that I love. And I don't see that. I think that this simpler, not simple approach is probably what the game needs, and it is clear that steps are being made to try to ensure that there's still as much tactical complexity as there's ever been. The tricks are going to be different, and the decisions are going to be different, and the moves are going to be different. But I think that if you liked the ways in which Ninth edition encouraged gameplay that matched the flavor of factions and units. So the stuff that Eldar, like battle focus, the stuff that Eldar do on the table feels very Eldari. I think that feeling is going to be preserved in 10th edition, and I think it's reasonable to hope that the tactical nuance will also be preserved. I think a good indication of how this may work is like the skulking horror rule on that Termagant datasheet that was revealed. Now, there were lots of cool things you could do with your Termagants using stratagems or subfaction abilities or whatever, but there was no like cool datasheet power. But now all Termagants have this cool datasheet power, whereby when your enemy, when your opponent moves a unit, an enemy unit that finishes a move or an advanced move within 9 inches of your Termagants, they can move d6. They can scuttle away. That's cool. That's very like small bug Tyrannid. They're scuttly and mobile. It's thematic. It's tactically interesting, right? There's a lot of cool tactical stuff you could do with that without necessitating some additional complexity involved in having to memorize a bunch of stratagems or flip open a book to some Army of Renown page to do the. They just do it, and I think that's super cool. Obviously, we can't be absolutely certain about tactical depth or how the game will look until we really see all of the rules, but I, for one, am feeling really optimistic, despite my initial qualms, that this is going to work really well, and that we're gonna like the edition. Let's talk about what this means for my website and my YouTube channel. So now that 9th edition's days are officially numbered, so too are unit focus videos and other edition specific videos that I'm going to produce in the next few months. I'm still going to do a few more of these sooner rather than later. I'm planning to do one pretty much right away on including Harlequin patrols alongside Craft World Arcs of Omen faction. I've been meaning to do this all the way back to when the book dropped, so that's happening. There's a thing I want to talk about with Warlock Conclaves. I'm going to do a video on that. I might do one on Autarchs. Suddenly they're appearing in lists since Arcs of Omen. So there'll be some other tactical stuff, but the closer we're getting to June, the fewer videos I'm going to produce that are rules specific to 9th edition rules, for obvious reasons. They're not going to be relevant for very long. And what always happens when an edition of Warhammer enters this like lame duck phase, I don't, those of you in the UK might not be familiar with that term, but here in America, a lame duck is a president who is still in office, but who's been voted out, who's being succeeded. So you know that their days are numbered. People just get a lot less interested in new tactics or how various factions are doing when the end of an edition has been announced. And so I'm going to start focusing in my videos on other kinds of content as we get closer to June. For example, I think we're finally going to see that video on how Eldar developed in the early days of 40k, from vagabond traders and pirates to the path-obsessed, doomed craft worlders that we know and love. I might also do videos on stuff like psychology at the table, or maybe even how to deal with rude or unpleasant opponents. I might do something on lore, that kind of thing. I have a lot of things in the hopper that I've been putting off that I'd really like to get to. Once we get into May and June, I'm going to be prioritizing that sort of content that will still be relevant a few months into 10th edition, instead of stuff that, you know, would be applicable for a few weeks and then not at all. Incidentally, those of you who are interested in that evergreen type of content, maybe you're new to the channel and you don't know how far back you can go with videos and have them still be relevant. I've created a playlist that will link. I'll link it in the video description for this video, but the playlist is comprised entirely of videos that will continue to be relevant regardless of what edition of 40k we're in or what current rule set applies. Sometimes in those videos I might refer to some rule that is from an earlier edition, but the central content of the video is simply not edition specific. So if you want to see more content and you're not sure how far you can go back, the evergreen video playlist is an option. When 10th edition does eventually drop, maybe at the end of June, I will rapidly put out, as I did when the Eldari Codex dropped in 9th Ed, several videos reviewing all of the Craft World's content, and I hope to also update my tragically neglected actual website. Sorry, those of you who prefer that content. It hasn't gotten much love since the fall. It's not that I don't still love it. I mentioned in my Farseers report, the last few months have made it difficult for me to produce as much content as I would like, and one of the things that went by the wayside a little bit this year was those articles. But I'm hoping to also have written content corollaries for all of the new 10th Ed content, and be a little bit better in the first quarter of 10th edition about keeping up with that content too. So that's what I've got. I hope to be back very soon with a tactics video about Harlequins, but I'm really psyched about 10th edition. I'm feeling very optimistic about it. I hope that you also feel optimistic, because it is unnerving to have a thing that you love facing a big shakeup, because there's definitely risk. But I really think we're going to be okay. I think it's going to be super cool. If you liked the video, I hope you will click like. If you have not yet subscribed, I hope you will subscribe. If you wish to help out my algorithm and leave a comment, or if you have something to say, that's cool too. I really love hearing from you. Just a quick reminder that those of you who are patrons get early access to this content. For $3 a month, you could become a patron. You can also, as a patron, download content like a podcast. And best of all, I think, you get access to a Discord, which is like a private, very friendly, very active community of all kinds of Eldari players. We're fortunate to have, we have very casual players and people who love narrative play, and then we have some really big names who are names on the tournament circuit, and that's cool too. So if you want to be part of that conversation, I think the Patreon is totally worth it, and I certainly appreciate it. Helps with content creation. Lastly, I'll just mention the Kickstarter for VoxLink. VoxLink is that free app that is going to make it easier for you to find people to play with, both when you're traveling and locally. Incidentally, it also helps you find like YouTube content about the stuff that you are most interested in. And because it's free, I think there's kind of no reason not to just give it a whirl. I'll link the Kickstarter also in the video description. So that's it. I'll be back soon. Thanks so much. Best of luck in your next campaign. I hope you're feeling optimistic about the new edition. Take care.